Welcome to the Society of Human Resource Management Conference online. Sorry we didn't get to see you live and in person. If you're watching this, it's because you want to find out what the secret sauce is in creating greater cooperation and a culture of inclusion in your organization. So normally we can kind of get a sense for who we are, but since this is virtual and you're watching this either after the fact or maybe for some of you before the conference even starts, we're not going to be able to interact with questions and answers kind of thing. So if you've got questions during this process, just jot them down and I'll invite you to email me at emo@emospeaks.com and I will answer your questions. Now, I'm probably not going to answer all your questions in this conference, in this session, because number one, we don't have time to do that. But I wanted to make sure that even though we don't have this live interaction, that we're going to get as close to that as possible for you to get the answers that you're looking for. Now, you don't know who I am, and no one introduced you to me. Maybe you've read my little intro online, but for those people who are seeing me for the first time and they're going, who is this guy? And what does he know about conflict? And what does he know about creating a culture of inclusion, cooperation? Let me give you the brief background. My training is in marriage and family therapy, and I've been doing relational therapy since 1999. And dealing with conflict in marriages is probably the most intense situations of conflict relationally that you'll find. Now, one of my clients several years ago came to me and said, Emil, the stuff that you're teaching me, I'm using it at work and it's working like a charm. Can you come and bring those strategies and those principles and train my people at work? And thus began doing corporate training. And I've been doing that for years ever since. Now, it was kind of awkward showing up to the conference with my book, You Can Turn Conflict into Closeness, where the cover is two people holding hands. So I end up writing my other book, Confidence in Conflict, Turning Breakdowns into Breakthroughs in Business, where I use the similar strategies and principles to empower people at work with the skills to take the diversity and differences that are going to be a part of every organization and kind of harvest the value of that diversity and differences in a way that creates more breakthroughs. If everybody thinks alike, we don't have advancement. We need the conflict that happens when different people come together from different backgrounds and perspectives in order to create breakthroughs. But that's not what normally happens. What normally happens when people come from diversity and differences, it creates contention. And that contention leads to a breakdown in not only the relationship, but also in progress of the goals of the organization. And I've seen it countless times where we're trying to embrace diversity only to build walls instead of bridges. And unless we have the tools to deal with those differences in a healthy way, we're going to end up, button heads and creating more contention than collaboration. So that's what the goal of this presentation is to give you what I call the secret sauce. Okay. The most simplified, boiled down, the syrup of the principles and skills to turn that conflict into collaboration, which if we have those skills, we create a culture of cooperation and inclusion out of diversity and differences. Now, the book that I wrote on confidence in conflict has tons of different chapters, and we can't cover them all. It's about understanding conflict, understanding the defensive cycle, like how we get sucked into this contentious cycle where we just spin our wheels. Then I talk about the skills that we need to have, assuming good intent, bring up issues in a respectful, responsible way, responding to people when they're being a little hostile or aggressive, they're under the gun. and they're not bringing things up in a nice way, which can make it really difficult to respond in a respectful, cooperative way. So we need to have some skills on how to respond to people who are coming off a little hot. And then we need to be able to resolve issues, like really come to some resolution on things so that we can be in harmony and move forward. We need to resolve issues. And the book also has other elements, like how do we deal with communication when it's not face to face? Email, text, phone messages. How do we deal with being able to disagree in a group of people so that there's cooperation among all the participants instead of only the loud people get heard? How do I disagree without being disagreeable so that I can share my diversity, share those differences that can lead to new ways of seeing things and lead to new solutions that we normally wouldn't have seen if I didn't, share my opinion and perspective. So since we can't cover all of those things, again, I'm just going to try to boil it down and give you the syrup, the secret sauce of how to create a sense of unity and inclusion out of diversity and differences. The secret sauce. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of introduce conflict, kind of explain to you the difference between what I call conflict and contention. And then there's going to be two skills that we're going to talk about. Now, there's tons of other skills, but we don't have time for all of them. We're going to talk about how to respond to issues when somebody comes at us a little hot and spicy, and also how to bring up an issue that increases the likelihood of being really heard and understood, maybe even validated, so that they're not being defensive and shutting us down. So we want to respond to people, and we want to be able to bring up issues. And in order to do that, we need to understand how conflict turns into contention. And then we're going to use that information to come up with the strategies on how to interact and communicate. So those are the three things. Understand conflict, respond to people being aggressive, and then number three, bring up issues. Now, some of you are going, well, what about resolving issues? Sorry, bro. We can't cover everything. We're only cover as much as we possibly can during this time. And if you want more information, look, if you want a copy of my book, just email me at email@emilspeaks.com. I will send you one for free. Like literally, you don't even have to pay shipping. I'm giving away the book there live. So you should be getting the same sweet deal. So if you really want one, I'll send you one. So my mission, the objective, is to empower people to turn the differences and diversity into discovery. Create a sense of cooperation and collaboration where people who have differences feel included and embraced in that culture. Everything's good when things are going good. People get along as long as there's no differences or different points of view or perspectives or disappointments. As soon as there's a disappointment or a difference, that's when you're going to start to see people shutting down, falling apart, or becoming aggressive. When people are getting along and it's going smooth, that's the homogeneity. That's just people kind of staying in their lane. And there's not a lot of progress when people are just kind of staying in their lane, avoiding conflict. When people avoid conflict, we're literally avoiding breakthroughs. Because remember, conflict and contention, they're not the same thing. Conflict is necessary in order to create breakthroughs. But contention destroys collaboration and cooperation. Contention is combative, where conflict is engagement of differences. That's it. Now, there's been this huge push in our society that's been long overdue to embrace and value diversity and differences. The problem is, and this is what I see when I do corporate training, and maybe you've seen this, is with the push of embracing diversity, unfortunately, we haven't supported the embracing of the diversity. We haven't been trained on how to disagree and how to include differences in the conversations. So far, we've included them in our organizations, but unless we create strategies to include them in the conversations, then people become compartmentalized and divisive in the diversity rather than part of the seasons that give more flavor to the soup. So we need to empower people with the skills to turn the diversity and differences into discovery. If we don't do that, then we're going to be stuck. So I'm gonna give you these two tools: attunement, which is how to bring things up, and the other one is how to respond to people when they are, let's call it hostile or negative or critical. It's just we need to be able to respond to people when they're coming at us kind of spicy, and we need to be able to bring things up when they need to when we need to share something, we need to disagree or call their attention to something that would help them and the organization grow. So those are going to be two skills. But in order to do that, we need to understand what conflict is and how conflict can really easily turn into contention. And in order to do that, we need to understand defensiveness. Defensiveness is this natural impulse to protect ourselves, and not just from, potential bodily harm. What we're doing is we're defending the way people see us, the way we want to be seen. And so if someone comes at us in a way that seems aggressive or incongruent with how we see ourselves, it's really easy to slip into the impulse to defend ourselves. And we defend ourselves by either being counter-critical or shutting down. We either become aggressive or avoidant. Those are two pathways of defensiveness. Defensiveness is not a choice, okay? Defensiveness is the limbic system. See, responding in a reasonable way requires the frontal cortex to be engaged. More often than not, I would say 100% of the time, but no one can say 100% of the time, when people are in a situation where they feel attacked, misunderstood, misrepresented, the limbic system is saying it's fight or flight time. We need to either get out of there or we need to shut that thing down. Neither one of those strategies actually support collaboration and good communication. And so being defensive usually triggers the other person of being defensive. They'll either get aggressive or they'll shut down. So defensiveness is a natural impulse to protect ourselves from real or perceived threat. In order to hijack our limbic system, which is designed to protect ourselves, we need strategy. We need some discipline. And one of the things that we do to try to prevent this frustration and disappointment that leads to contention is we try to manage expectations. What we try to do is we try to avoid the potential or the possibility when disappointments and frustrations kick in. And how do we do that? We try to do that by getting really clear on what our expectations are for ourselves and other people. In organizations, we sometimes have job descriptions, and those job descriptions, position descriptions, delineate all of the different expectations that we have to fulfill that role. Now, the theory is that if I'm really clear on what's expected of me, and I know what's expected of other people, if we all perform those expectations, then no one's going to be disappointed or frustrated because everyone's, reaching or achieving those expectations. They're managing expectations because they're living up to those expectations. But that's all pie in the sky. That's ideal. That's not actual real. Like, because people are human. Just because we know our roles and the rules of engagement and what's expected of us, we still we still get tired. We still forget. We still misunderstand or miscommunicate what we're trying to say. Maybe the message in the email wasn't as clear as we thought it was. Maybe it came across in a way that the other person got offended. We also have, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is once we kind of see something the certain way, kind of a narrative, then it actually limits our ability to see different points of view and perspectives. And so we kind of get lost, we get our blinders on. We don't do this on purpose. It just happens to all of us. Now, there are these things and many more that just make the idea that if we just have clear expectations, that we're going to be fine. Because what we don't include are differences of opinions, being challenged, having something not work the way we thought it was going to work, having someone come up with a different point of view or perspective that maybe we haven't considered before. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. All of those real things means that we're going to have some conflict. We're going to butt heads. And how we deal with those moments that are going to happen will make all the difference between a breakdown in the relationship, breakdown in communication, and maybe even a breakdown in the processes at work. But if we handle them well, that can lead to trust, respect, breakthroughs, productivity, literally creating a culture where people enjoy going to work because they feel valued in their differences. Everything that we do not find a way to resolve and come to grips with will become debris that gets in the way of being productive. And it also gets in the way of for us to feel good about the jobs that we have and about how valued we feel when we're going to work. So having tools, having strategies to deal with the inevitable conflict is very, very important. So now let's put those two ideas together: defensiveness and the inevitability of conflict. If conflict is inevitable and defensiveness is the natural impulse to when differences come together, and defensiveness creates more defensiveness, like kind of like a chain reaction of conflict that leads to contention, then we can literally kind of explode an organization by a misunderstanding or a frustration or a disappointment. Because once that reaction leads to another reaction to another reaction, then way too many people become involved in the drama that now creates a culture where people don't want to share. They don't want to risk feeling embarrassed or shut down or unvalued. Recently, I did a mediation between the CEO and their attorney. And the attorney was getting more and more disengaged from their exec team meetings. And the efforts that attorney, in-house attorney, efforts to try to kind of resolve things, they just got dismissed by the CEO. The CEO was too focused on bigger items. So finally, out of frustration, the attorney goes, "You know what? I'm done. I can't live here. I can't stay in an organization where I don't even feel valued, and what things are important to me are just dismissed by the CEO." And so the CEO calls me and goes, "Hey, I need some help here. This attorney's, I really don't want to replace that person. They do a great job. And I want to see if there's a way to save this relationship." Now, I bring them together, and they did not have a strategy for dealing with disappointments and frustrations. Both of them had expectations. And what they would do is they would share the expectation with the other person, but there was no understanding of each other's points of view or perspectives. So it was literally a he shares, without any of them being understanding. And without them being understanding to create some resolution, those issues that weren't resolved started to kind of ferment and become resentment. It started creating a narrative where both of them thought the other person was being unreasonable. And out of desperation, finally, the attorney says, I'm done. And out of desperation, the CEO says, help me figure this thing out. So when I brought them together, I asked them, hey, what do you guys do for your organization to make sure you're reaching your goals? Well, they have executive meetings. Then those executive meetings turn into other meetings. And they talk about, are they reaching their objectives, their milestones for, improving their business, reaching their goals objectively. And I says, well, what are you doing to make sure that your communication pipelines are open? How often do you do maintenance on the pipelines of that information being shared? And both of them were, dumbfounded because they hadn't even thought about how important that would be to make sure that they were getting good information and that they were syncing up. So I walked them through the process that I'm going to show you. And it blew both of their minds to realize how simple the process is to create a sense of cooperation, collaboration, and inclusion. And this was with people who had the same goals and objectives. They just had different points of view and perspectives of how they were both fulfilling their assignments. So again, defensiveness is what hijacks us, and conflict is inevitable. So we need tools and skills to engage in the interaction, engage in the conversation that creates greater trust, inclusion, cooperation in order to create breakthroughs. That's what we want to do. So how do we do that? What's the attitude that we need to have to be able to make these breakthroughs? Well, remember, defensiveness is the impulse that starts to shut down communication in a productive way. So we need to do the opposite of defensiveness. We need to have the attitude of embracing feedback. We need to embrace messages that might be coming across a little hostile. Because if we don't have the attitude of embracing that, then we will default into being defensive. And when we're defensive, we shut down. Collaboration, cooperation is dead. So we need to have the attitude of, how do I embrace what you're trying to say, even if what you're saying isn't coming across very nice? How do I embrace why you're doing why you're not following through with what I thought you should do in a way that puts you in the most positive light? If I don't have that skill of bringing things up in a way that puts you in a positive light, then I'm triggering the defensiveness in the other person. If I don't have the skill of embracing the messages that they're trying to say to me, even though they may not be saying it in the nicest way, then I'm going to go defensive and shut down. So I have to have the attitude of embracing. So now we're going to shift into the skills of being able to respond to aggression. And then after we do that, then I'm going to talk to you about how to bring up an issue. Again, we're not even talking about resolving the issues, because let's be honest, we can't resolve issues until there's mutual understanding, until there's a sense of cooperation and collaboration. Okay. So we first have to develop the skill of understanding, especially when the other person who's talking to us may not be coming across smooth and sweet. So let's talk about how to respond to somebody when they're coming across a little bit spicy. To break this down, there are 4 statements in conflict. That's it. There's only 4 statements in conflict. Understanding what these 4 statements are and then how to respond to those statements is the process of developing or what's going to be required so that we can be confident in those moments when someone comes at us. Because remember, as soon as someone comes at us, the natural impulse is to be defensive. So I need to understand how I'm going to respond strategically rather than impulsively. So here are the four statements of conflict. A criticism. Criticisms start with the word you. You always, you never, you did, you should, you think, you want, you are. If it starts with the word you, it's a criticism. The next statement in conflict is a question. Now, a question is a request for information. If it's not asking for something, it's not a question. Doesn't matter if it's got a question mark at the end or not, because there's rhetorical questions and there are loaded questions. And neither one of those are really requests for information. They're usually kind of a setup for either another declaration or a criticism. Okay. So we're only looking at statements that are a request for information to be a question. If they're not requests for information, then they're either going to be a criticism or the third one, declaration. A declaration is a statement about the person speaking or a general description of the situation. Okay. I, this, that, we, okay? This is ridiculous. I've had it. Things aren't working. We aren't getting along. We need to do things differently. Each of those statements are an example of a declaration. See, I'm talking about me or the situation. Now, there's a fourth statement. You're not going to get it very often, but I wanted you to be aware of the statement, its style, its the feel. The fourth statement in conflict is a command. A command is an order or a directive. A command can be said nicely. Please stop doing that. Okay. That's kind of nice, not like gentle nice. It could also be harsh. Take your job seriously. Grow up. Check your emotions at the door. This isn't a daycare or a therapy center. Okay. So commands are an order or a directive. Think about it. That's it. There's only four statements in conflict. If one of the statements don't fit in the category, it's probably a declaration. Okay. Now, some people say, well, what about body language? That's going to be one of the four. Now, body language may be hard to interpret. For example, see the eye roll, crossing the arms, shoulder shrug. If I were to translate the body language, I don't know what it's going to say, but it's going to say something like, that person thinks that I'm an idiot, or they're really frustrated with me, or they think I messed up. Now, notice how either one of those will fit into one of the four statements that I came up with. So if someone gives me body language, then I'm just going to ask him, hey, when you rolled your eyes and crossed your arms and kind of said, "Oh my gosh," I'm wondering if you're just thinking that I'm being an idiot right now, or you think I did something wrong. Now that body language needs to be transformed into words. And that person who did the body language will either confirm one of those to be true or correct it and give you what they're really trying to say. They might even shift into asking a question like, why did you do this instead of that? Okay. Now, questions, let's be honest, aren't going to be asked like Mary Poppins is going to ask a question, because we're in a state of conflict. We're butting heads. So the questions are going to have a little bit of spice to it. Our job is to identify the different statements and respond to those statements using the recipe. Now, how do we deal with the criticism? Criticisms are the hardest ones to respond to because they come directly to us and are really hard not to take it personal. It's easy to be offended by that. Now, some people go, "Oh, I'm not offended by it at all." Well, are you going to embrace it? if it's partially true, or do you make excuses or justify, explain yourself? If we're not embracing it, then we're probably being defensive. So how do we embrace it? When we get a criticism, starts with the word you don't take your job seriously, you're late, you're not engaged, you've stopped paying attention. Now, even though the style or the process of them bringing it up isn't effective, okay, what we're doing is we're trying to respond in a way that's productive, even if they start the conversation in a way that's less than productive. So if we get a criticism, we're going to respond by agreeing with the element of truth. Okay? The element of truth. If there's some truth to it, we only talk about how that criticism is true. So let's go back to my example with the attorney and the CEO. When the CEO wanted to know why the attorney turned in his resignation, the attorney said, because you've been dismissive of me and have shut me down when I've brought issues to you that I thought were concerning. Now, the CEO desperately wanted to point out why he was dismissive, but that's not what he's supposed to do. He's not asking a question. He's saying, the attorney's saying, the reason why is because you have been dismissive. You've been impatient. You waved me off. You've even said things like, you're not interested. So now the CEO is sitting there and he's like, there's reasons why I'm doing this, but there's truth to it. And so he was able to use this process and say, you know what, you're right. I can see on many occasions that I have been dismissive. I've been impatient. I've even shown contempt by like waving my hand saying, not interested, don't want to hear it. Yeah, I have done those things. Now notice, when the criticism comes, the response is agree with the truth. And the element of truth, nothing more, nothing less. No explanation, just agree with the truth. What's interesting is when the CEO agreed with it was the part that was true, the attorney was almost in shock. He's like, whoa. Never has the CEO really embraced the part that was true. Now, of course, there were explanations, but the explanations aren't going to affect the attorney right now. First, validation. Validation is the ingredient that opens someone's mind. It gets them curious. See, once I feel validated and confused, now I'm curious. So he felt validated, but he's confused. And why did you do these things? Why did you shut me down? I don't want to be around somebody who shuts me down. Why? Notice how that sets us up for the next statement in conflict. Now, before we get there, sometimes people will ask, well, Emil, what if there's no truth to a criticism? Am I supposed to lie and agree with them? No, 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 no. Never lie and never agree with something that you can't agree with, because then that would be either manipulative or dishonest. If you get a criticism that isn't true, then what I want you to do is just say, what do you mean? Why would you say that? Then that gives the person who's saying the criticism to reformulate what they're saying. Maybe use different words or use a different example. So let's say the CEO says, what do you mean I've been dismissive? Then the attorney can say, well, on many occasions you've said, that's not interesting to me. That's not high level enough. I'm not interested. Well, now the CEO can say, that's true. On multiple occasions, I have told you, I'm not interested. That's not high level. I'm not interested in that kind of information. So that's true. Okay. So by asking, what do you mean? Then that person can be more specific. Once they're more specific and it's a criticism, then I can find the truth to that criticism. Sometimes people will back up and bail on the criticism and then just ask a question or make a declaration. Now, the next one, questions, Why did you? When we get a question, just answer the question. There's nothing sophisticated about it. Just do the best you can to answer the question without making excuses. The difference between an explanation and an excuse: explanations give us understanding, okay, background for why this choice or why this behavior was made. Excuses are trying to make that okay. We're not trying to excuse, we're trying to explain. That's how we deal with questions. Just explain, don't make an excuse. Third one is a declaration. A declaration is the person speaking. If someone comes at me and they're talking about themselves, okay, that's a declaration. If they're talking about the situation, that's a declaration. Let's say the attorney says this: I don't want to work in an environment where I don't feel valued. I don't want to work in an environment where I don't feel valued. Both are declarations. He's talking about himself and the situation. The response to that is to capture the emotion and make that emotion make sense. Sometimes the emotion is not the right word for it. It's the attitude. But you capture the emotion or attitude and make it make sense. I don't want to work in an environment where I don't feel appreciated. Okay. So if you were to identify that emotion or the attitude, what would we say? How would we describe it? Well, he's disappointed, right? He's frustrated because he doesn't feel valued. He doesn't feel like his contributions are embraced. So you in your own words, I can see that you feel really frustrated, disappointed, because when you share your opinions or perspectives, you don't feel like what you're sharing is being valued. Remember, with the declaration, we're not agreeing with or disagreeing with anything. We're just making sure the other person feels heard and understood. The more you look at these different statements, like I have, the more you start to realize that how people talk kind of gives you a sneak peek into what they need in response. When people are critical, they need objective agreement, okay? They need validation of substance, of fact. When people make declarations, they need validation of emotion or attitude. They need to feel like they're not crazy for how they feel or perceive. When people ask questions, they're confused and they need information. Now, depending on how they ask the question, like if they're really, really angry, then they're probably not as open as someone who's like really perplexed and confused. So sometimes when someone's asking a question and they don't even seem remotely interested in the answer, then I'll sometimes say, well, do you really want to know? Like, wait a minute, because it seems like you're really frustrated. That'll help them to think, well, do I really want to know, or am I really frustrated? Now, you don't say that to be patronizing, because that's just going to make things worse. That's not collaborative. That's combative. These tools are not a tactic to avoid where our heart needs to be. We need to put our heart in a way that's embracing, okay? Match the attitude of embracing versus defending. And so these tools are to make it easier for us to articulate that embracing attitude. So far, we got criticisms, questions, and declarations. Okay, now I'm going to give you the fourth one. This is commands, and it's kind of like I throw this one in for free because commands and declarations are handled the same way. In order to avoid a minimizing kind of impact on the relationship, we want the relationship for collaboration to be kind of even. Even though there may be responsibilities and hierarchy, if we don't have collaborative interactions, even between hierarchy, we will not have the best contribution. So we need to make that collaborative atmosphere a reality. So how do we do that? Even if we get a command, we treat the command as a declaration, okay? We capture the emotion of that statement and we make that statement make sense. So let's use an example. Come prepared to the meetings. Okay, that's a statement. That's a command. They're all statements, but this is a command. Come prepared to the meetings. Now, in order to make it collaborative, okay, and not combative, then the response would be declaration, capture the emotion or attitude, and make it make sense. How do I make it make sense? Because how do I do that? They literally will say that in their statement of command. We just have to listen for what they're saying. Come prepared to the executive meetings. See how that's kind of forceful and a little bit spicy? The response would be, it sounds like it's really important for me to come to those meetings prepared with the information that you need, or just come prepared, more prepared, because I may not know those specific things. I need to come to these executive meetings more prepared than I am. Now the CEO can go, well, yeah, you see, if we just stop there, communication's over. There's no collaboration, there's no cooperation. There's boss, servant, not cohesive unity. If we want cohesive unity and collaboration, then the language and the interactions, they need to match with the culture that to match the culture that we say. If we just say we believe in unity, but we don't have the tools or the habits or the behavior to support it, then unity is just, it's fluff. There's no substance to it. And a lot of people's organizations will say they value inclusion and unity, but then they don't support it with principles and strategies to do it. So as their end result, those values stay on a beautiful poster on the wall instead of written in the hearts of the people to support the culture. There's no way you're going to remember all of these different ideas and principles. So what I'm going to do is, if you're interested, I'll send you an image that has these bullet points. Now, what's cool is you could probably just take notes, but if you want a little cheat sheet postcard kind of thing to help you remember how to identify those statements in conflict and how to respond, then just email me at email@emilspeaks.com and I'll just send you one via email. One of the reasons why it's important to change the way we process information coming to us is, remember, we need to hijack our natural defensive impulse. And we need something rather simple to do in order to accomplish that. And so the simple piece, and I'm not saying simple is easy in this situation, but the simple thing to do is be able to identify the statement that's being used. So someone comes at us. Immediately we feel the feels of defensiveness, like, what? Okay. What we need to do in that moment is ask ourselves, okay, was that a criticism, question, declaration, or command? Did it start with the word you? Okay, criticism. Was it a request for information? Question. Was it neither one of those? Then it's either a declaration or a command, and we don't really care which one it is because we treat them both the same. Now, to simplify this even more, hopefully you've seen this, the simplification starting to come together in the back of your mind, is if it's a criticism or a declaration, we validate. If it's a criticism, we validate the truthfulness of the statement. If it's a declaration, we validate the emotional experience or the attitude of the person. Okay, we validate. If it's neither one of those, then it's a question. And if it's a question, we just answer the question. Once we answer the question, the person's going to say another criticism or a declaration or a command. It's like a dance. we literally can script it out using the vicarious identification of the other person. We can kind of put in our minds how we think the other person would respond and be really darn close to how they would respond. So we can practice this before we actually have the conversation face to face. We all have people in our organization where we're not looking forward to interacting with them. And we could identify that the reason why we don't feel comfortable interacting with them is because, and we can define it, they might say something that makes it hard for us to respond to. And if we think about what they say, we're going to be able to identify if it's a criticism, question, declaration, or command. And then once we know how to respond, we can write that out. We now know how to respond in a way that captures what they need to have heard so that they can go, oh, I got the information that I need. And then they can move on. Now, so far it's been one-sided, right? They've come at us. We have, for the moment, disregarded their approach to us. Okay? We've made that not the primary issue. We've made the content of their frustration our focus. But we also have to deal with how they're coming at us, because that's not conducive to a culture of collaboration and unity. That's destructive. So in addition to learning how to respond to someone when they come at us, we need to know how to bring up something to them, which brings me to my second skill I was hoping to share with you. Okay, we now know how to respond to somebody, criticisms, questions, declarations, and commands. And so you just train at that. Now we're going to talk about how to bring up an issue. These are the 3 steps of attunement. I used to call them the 4 steps of complaining, but complaining had such a negative connotation. Now, the reason why I call it the 3 steps of attuning is because I'm combining steps 2 and 3 into one step. Let me walk you through the 3 steps of attuning. Now, attuning is, well, tuning in, getting on the same page, getting the same frequency emotionally and expectation-wise, so that we can more finely tune like the gears coming together with not only expectations of roles and rules, but also expectations of the way we interact. If we have a sense of comfort and ease in the way we bring up issues, even in differences, then we've increased our confidence in conflict. Yep, makes sense? Okay, so here are the 3 steps of attunement, bringing up an issue. 1, you share your feelings and reasons. Okay? These are the I statements that we're familiar with. Now, when we do an I statement in this approach, I want you to be more vulnerable than hostile. Okay? Don't bring up things in a way that's that's going to accuse somebody of something. What we want to do is share our feelings and reasons in the most vulnerable language we can. Hey, I've been feeling really disappointed, confused, minimized, hurt, devalued, misunderstood. So having the statements that we bring up in using a vulnerable language reduces the likelihood of triggering a defensive reaction. If we're hostile, we can trigger defensiveness. There's no way to trigger compassion and understanding. All we can do is increase the likelihood of doing that by minimizing defensiveness and inviting understanding by us being more vulnerable. Now, a lot of people, they don't really feel comfortable being vulnerable. That's why it's called vulnerable. But we want to use vulnerable language. Disappointed, dismissed, misunderstood, hurt. Maybe we can use the word frustrated if we don't have a hostile tone to it. Then we explain why. Let's go back to my attorney friend. I felt really dismissed. I felt minimized. I felt unappreciated because when I would share with you concerns that I thought were really important to the direction of the organization, they were just kind of shut down. They weren't embraced. They were just dismissed. Now, the next step is to pivot. So I've shared my feelings and reasons. Now, the next step is to put myself in the other person's shoes. So I would say, but if I put myself in your shoes, and then I go right into really putting myself into their shoes, why does that person dismiss? Why does that person minimize or not embrace the information that this attorney is sharing, the CEO, right? Well, if I'm the attorney, I might go, but if I put myself in your shoes, maybe the reason why you don't take the time to really hear me out and make sure that what I'm sharing is understood is because you're probably just really focused on larger, higher level issues and concerns like direction of the organization. And so when I bring up, scenarios and situations from individual conversations I've had with past employees, for you, that seems way too like grassroots. And so if it's too grassroots, it's not helping us focus on the direction. In addition to that, another reason why you probably might be dismissive is you're so focused on such bigger pieces like growing the organization, growing the business, that focusing on those little interactive type things are a distraction to you to the larger direction things you need to focus on. Notice, I'm not saying that him being dismissive is okay. What I'm saying is I understand why you're not doing it. Doesn't mean it's okay. Okay. So I'm literally becoming his defense for him. So I say, but if I put myself in your shoes, I do all that. And then the last step, the third step is checking in. Am I close? What am I missing? When I ask that question, am I close? What am I missing? It gives them an opportunity to either correct what I was saying or confirm what I've said. All right, now this is where the full circle kicks in. All right, I've just asked, am I close? What am I missing? Focusing on understanding the crap out of his position, not saying that it's okay. I've delivered my complaint, okay, my issue, my disappointment. I've spent the time understanding him or her, whoever. And then when he answers the question, am I close? What am I missing? He only has 4 options: criticisms, questions, declarations, or commands. And guess what? You already know how to respond to those. If he makes a criticism, you keep bringing up issues that I can't address in our executive meeting. Criticism, declaration. You keep bringing up issues that I can't address in the executive meetings. What's the criticism rule? Agree with the part that's true. You know what? You're right. I do keep bringing up issues that we can't bring up in those executive meetings that you can't deal with. And that's got to be frustrating for you. Number one, for me to keep bringing those things up. And number two, feeling powerless to change it. And then I check in, right? So no matter what the other person says, the CEO says, I know how to respond in a way that's collaborative. Okay? Pause. You know how I said when someone comes at you kind of spicy, we can totally handle it because we have criticisms, questions, declarations, and commands. We know the formula. But how they're approaching us isn't conducive to the values and the culture that we're trying to create in the organization. So guess what? I'm going to need to complain. I mean, I'm going to need to bring that issue up to that person who came at me that way, whether it's my boss or my supervisor or a coworker or even one of the team members on my team. I follow the 3-step process. I bring up my issue and the reasons why. I put myself in their shoes and I check in. Okay. Notice we're talking about the delivery approach, how spicy it was, right? So I might say, hey, I got to be honest with you. I felt really attacked. I felt really minimized when you came at me with such, you were just angry and you were really accusatory of me in the way you approached it and got on my case about not being engaged in the meetings. But if I put myself in your shoes, you probably got a lot of stress, probably got a lot of things on your plate. And I think one of the reasons why you really wanted to, maybe you didn't really want to, but maybe the reason why you kind of let it go coming across a little spicy was because you really wanted to drive the point home. You're really serious about making that message come across loud and clear. And that's probably why your delivery wasn't as careful or sensitive as maybe you could have been. Notice I'm trying to make it make sense. I'm not trying to make it's okay. I'm trying to make it make sense. And then I check in. Am I close? What am I missing? Now that person who came at me all hostile is going to answer the question with the criticism, question, declaration, or command. You never listen to me until I get angry. That's a criticism. So I'd have to agree with what, you know what? Sometimes I haven't really paid attention until you've gotten really upset. And that's got to be exhausting. Okay. Now what's the CEO going to say now? Or what's the other person going to say now? They're going to go, yeah. What are we going to do about it? How do we fix this? You see? So even though I'm bringing up how they brought it to me, I'm still going to take accountability for maybe one of the reasons why. Let's say I'm right. The reason why is they're really frustrated. They got a lot on their plate. And let's say they came across too hot. Well, by me bringing it up and I say, am I close? What am I missing? And they're going, you know what? Yeah, that wasn't okay of me. I've just got a lot of people breathing down my neck. And I feel like, I'm trying to do this all by myself. And I feel like people don't want to listen to me until I'm upset. Big declaration. So I can validate their emotions. Notice I'm not saying it's okay. I'm validating the emotion. You know what? That's got to suck. Or that's got to be awful. That's got to be heavy to feel like all of the weight's on you and you don't feel like you're really being respected or supported until you start, being, hard on people. And that's got to be awful. I don't say it's okay. That's all I do. Because then the other person's going to say, yeah, what are we going to do? How do we fix this? How can we work toward a better resolution? Time out. So far, I've been talking about tactics, okay, and interaction. And for the goal is to create greater cooperation and inclusion. In order to do that, we need to have respect for each other. By me responding, following the 4 steps, and by me approaching, following the 3 steps of attunement, I'm creating respectfulness, okay? I'm being respectful to them and respect worthy from them. And once there's respect given, then that becomes something that we can admire. And I'm also creating an environment where the person feels comfortable enough to bring those issues to me. So now the pipeline of interaction is wide open. We can share openly. We can disagree without it being contentious. And it's following these things as a person, one person at a time, that has an impact in how the other person feels. And that person, if they learn these principles, then they too can have that same outcome of respect, admiration, cooperation. And it's only when we do this in a consistent way that we truly can take diversity and differences and bring them together in a spirit of cooperation, collaboration, and inclusivity out of diversity. I know we didn't talk about everything, right? Because we don't have time to talk about everything. So if you've got questions that you want me to answer, email me, emo@emospeaks.com. If you want my book, email me. I'll send it to you. I'll even pay for the shipping, as long as you commit to read the book and follow the principles. Because together is the only way we're going to change the way the world works.